Hey everybody, this is Phil McCardle, Chief Heart Officer at Room Ready. This is the Room for Heart podcast, where I am chatting with old friends, new friends, about what makes their heart beat fast to come to work every day. Most of my guests are in the technology industry and are participating to some degree in connecting people with the use of technology. And today I'm super excited to introduce a new friend, someone I've recently met in the industry whose story is really exciting to me. I love the way that he's approaching our industry, bringing kind of some new ideas with some old ideas into the marketplace. And I'm excited to introduce Sunil. And he is the founder of AV Design Labs, and works with outsourcing, some of the basic AV tasks that can be outsourced to help AV integrators provide a better, in theory, cheaper product to their end user to, really optimize kind of that AV workflow. So, Sunil, did I do an okay job representing what you do?
Perfect.
All right.
That was absolutely perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
On LinkedIn, my title says I'm engineering change for the AV integrator. So yeah, that about sums it up.
Yeah, awesome. So Sunil and I actually connected super spontaneously in the last several weeks. Sunil uses an accountant who is a friend of mine that I used to go to CrossFit with. I actually haven't seen our friend Peter in a couple of years. I bumped into his wife at a Chipotle maybe a year or so ago. And so it was a welcomed message to get a Facebook message from Peter and to say, hey, one of my clients is somebody that overlaps you in the industry a little bit. And, I think it would be cool if you guys connected and introduced Sunil and I. And, I don't know. I might be speaking for Sunil here, but a little bit of kindred spirits, and kind of hit it off somewhat quick in my view, so to speak. I guess I'll let him say whether or not that's the case for him. But yeah,
that's pretty much how it happened. We partnered with Peter earlier in the year. Because of the pandemic, we weren't able to meet face to face in person. So, when things started relaxing a little bit in July, I believe, so I set up a lunch meeting with Peter and we met, and it was just getting to know each other. And, he was curious. He's like, exactly what do you do? Mm-hmm. And I started explaining him, exactly what I did. And he's like, oh, wait a second. I think I know somebody who is an ex-client of mine or, current client. And probably in the same industry. And I'm like, who? So they mentioned Room Ready. So I'd heard about Room Ready, but obviously I didn't know anybody at Room Ready.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, that name sounds familiar. Maybe we should, if you don't mind, just make a connection.
Yeah.
And then I looked up Room Ready and I'm like, yeah, I know exactly who they are. And, that was it. I had no idea that he would follow through and take the effort and reach out and make the connection. But sure enough, he did. So yeah, that's how I got introduced to you.
Yeah, which is funny because we're in each other's backyard. I mean, for as small of a world in industries it is. I mean, you work in outsourcing. You could have been in India for all intents and purposes, but you live like 10 miles away from my house. So small world up here in the Northeast in New England. So that's fun.
It sure is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things that, was kind of fun in the beginning, Sunil and I, although now we're not at competing organizations, we were for a handful of years. You were at Red Thread for a whole bunch of years. Red Thread, I would call a frenemy. I don't have any ill will against them, but they're definitely a competitor. So they might not know they're my frenemy, but we'll go ahead and use that term with them. But that's not where you started. I would love to kind of rewind way back and talk about how you got started in the AV industry, because it wasn't in this country, correct? You got started in India.
That's correct. And I think not many of us actually intentionally get started in the AV business. I mean,
Fair point.
from people I've met, it just happens to be by chance. And I was no different. It was not a different experience for me as well. So I graduated college in '94.
Yeah.
And Y2K was upon us, and everybody, especially in India, was just racing to do some sort of computer programming to save the world. And that was not for me.
Yeah.
I did not like sitting behind a desk and just coding, and because my personality was a little bit more outgoing,
Yeah.
wanted to meet people and stuff like that. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not taking up a computer science job, even though that's what my degree was, electronic engineering. And so I said, you know what, I'll apply for college, post graduation MBA in the US, which is what I did for a year. I pursued it, and you go through the entrance exams and things like that. And unfortunately, I didn't get my visas to come here. So you need a student visa to come here, which I didn't. So, the dream of a US education came crashing down in '95.
Yeah.
At which point I was like, I got to find something to do now. And everybody, all my friends were a year ahead of me now because I had not done anything for a year. So I visited a friend of mine, and we were having dinner, and then his dad, out of the blue, the conversation started, and I said, yeah, I need to find a job now. So his dad's like, you know what? This guy stopped by my office this morning, and he was asking me if I knew somebody, starting fresh out of college who would like to join his business and work for him. So I asked him, what do they do? And he goes, I have no idea. He came to sell software at my place, but here's his number. Go call him, talk to him. So I called him, interviewed the next day, and I was offered the job right away.
Yeah.
And what they were doing was they were starting a new company in India selling LCD panels.
Okay.
Never had heard of what LCD panels were, what they did.
Yeah.
So it was a partnership firm of 3 guys, and I was the first employee for that company.
So real quick, this is the 90s, LCD panels.
Yeah.
How expensive were those, and what's like? Rewind us real quick. Remind us how crazy technology has dropped in price.
It was $3,000 just for an LCD panel.
And then how big is that?
In India,
like,
you had to,
how is that like a 19-inch panel, 10-inch? Like what is that?
So I think the biggest it got was like 21-inch diagonal.
Yeah.
But again, those were super expensive.
Yeah.
But so think about the size of your typical 15-inch computer screen.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a standard panel that was being used.
Yep.
And at the time in '95, it was considered like a technically superior product.
Yeah, yeah.
That was replacing old acetates.
Yep.
That people used to use, handwritten acetates with overhead projectors.
Yep.
So I'm like, this is pretty cool. And I asked them, my background's engineering, and the guy goes, yeah, you'll be doing sales.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's fine. I mean, it was an opportunity. I took it, and I started the following day. My first day at work was carrying this 60-pound overhead projector up 6 flights of stairs because the elevator wasn't working.
Yeah.
And, my boss had to do a demo. So I was basically just the person carrying the stuff to the room.
Yeah.
And my job was to just sit back and just observe, how he pitched. That was my first day at job. And I'm like, in the evening, I got back home. I'm like, did I really sign up for the right job?
Yeah, yeah.
And I had second thoughts. I'm like, is this the right thing for me? But I said, let's just stick it out. It's new. Who knows? And sure enough, my boss was a great salesperson. Amish Bhatt was his name at the time, and I learned a lot from him. The technique, the interaction, the human aspect of sales, all those things apparently came naturally to him, but I had to learn. And then after 6 to 8 months, I was still shadowing people, the three partners. I was still shadowing them. Like they weren't letting me loose on my own. So, this is one day I'm like, when am I going to do this on my own? So they let me. It's like, okay, next up, we'll go. I'll sit back and Sunil, you do the presentation. And that's how it started. We had butterflies the first time around, but first time getting in front of people, talking to them, trying to show, what the product did and things like that. But yeah, that was fun. After a while, it became a contest in our company.
Of course.
We would get like new models of LCD panels. And it would be a contest. Who would be the one to sell the first panel? So it was great. It was fun. The money wasn't that much, but it was good. For somebody right out of college and earning money and commission, it was good. Then came 97, around 97, end of 97s. There was this bank building a new facility, and they approached us saying, "Hey, we'd like an AMX system for our boardroom," and we had no idea what AMX was. So my bosses basically said, "Sunil, go ahead, figure out what AMX does, and see if we can sell them AMX." So started looking into it, and come to find out, so AMX was regional at the time, and they had their headquarters in Singapore. So I used to interface with the guys there, just trying to find product information. It's like, what is it that this product will do? Because the customer wants this. So they were helpful. They helped design a system. We pitched it, but then AMX said they wouldn't sell it to us because we were not authorized dealers.
Right on.
So we said, okay, what would it take to become authorized to buy products? So he said, well, you have to get trained. So I remember this distinctly because I walk into the office in the morning and my boss is like, Sunil, you have a passport, right? And I'm like, yeah, I do. He says, yeah, we're going to send someone to your house, get your passport picked up, go to the embassy, Singapore embassy, and get your visa. You're leaving tonight. I'm like that can't be happening. So that was my first overseas trip. They shipped me off to AMX Singapore. Went there, got trained for a week, came back. We didn't win that project though. I mean, we pitched it, we didn't win it. But the good news was we were authorized now to sell the product because we had the first level of training done. And then subsequently, there were like three levels of training you had to go through. I was like the chosen one apparently in the company. It's like, if you've had the first one, might as well do the second and third. Because of the technical background, I somehow grasped the programming aspect of it.
Right on.
So I became an AMX programmer in '98.
So that's super interesting to me. Just curious, was that at all prevalent in India at the time? Like, were there a handful of dealers and programmers, or were you?
There were just a few handful. So White October at the time was our biggest competition, and they were super trained on AMX. They must have sold and installed a few systems, but it was a new concept. Not many people were doing that, and so we said it was an opportunity. And my bosses, three bosses, because there were three partners, all of them were very visionary, saying, what, this is something that we can differentiate us in the marketplace with. So we started, coding AMX systems, and we won projects, and we were a small, growing company. So at the time, I mean, just like any integrator here in the US, if you're small size, you pretty much wear multiple hats.
Right on.
So I would do sales engineering, sometimes installation, but otherwise programming, troubleshooting, and final commissioning.
Right on.
And so 98 to 2000 was one of the best times of my year as a student learning AV. Because everything was hands-on. And because of the time zone difference, right? I mean, if you needed tech support, you would call Singapore. But if Singapore went was, because Singapore was a different time zone than India, they would go to sleep. We were still awake. So then we would have to call US.
Yeah.
So we would have to stay up late, wait for US to wake up. So, we went through all those. And like I said, it was one of the best learning experiences for me.
Yeah. One of my, early on with Room Ready, kind of a funny story, which kind of falls in line with, what you were just saying of like wearing multiple hats. So I got started and I was, trying to get us started in the Northeast, and we had done a significant install in the Cisco office. We had done their one pen location, and we really hadn't done much else in the city. I think we had done maybe a law firm at this point in time in Times Square. But I was in the city kind of drumming up, business, trying to meet with clients. And we had just finished the one pen job, maybe a month or two earlier, and one of the boxes broke. I think actually, ironically enough, I'm pretty sure it was an AMX box. And our programmer had to leave New York. He had to go somewhere else. And so he was going to miss the shipment. And so they said, oh, Phil's still in town. Phil, it's real easy. All you got to do is, unscrew from the rack, the box, pull the like 4 HDMI cables out, power cable, Ethernet, and then just plug them all back in the new box, kind of in the same spot. Everything will work fine. Sure. So I'm supposed to meet the shipment there. It was a late shipment for, UPS or FedEx or whoever. And it arrives at like 4. It's in a secure portion of the Cisco office, so I don't have a badge. So my Cisco contact lets me in. He lets me in. Is like, do you have what you need? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, great. I'm going to go kind of pack up my desk, get ready to go, and then I'll come back and check on you. Awesome. So I pull out the box, put in the new box, plug everything in. I'm doing a kind of a checkout call as the Cisco contact comes back. He's like, how you doing? And I'm like, great. Looks like everything's working well. I'm checking it out. And he was like, cool. I'm going to miss my train unless I go right now. Do you think you're all set? And I said, yeah, I think I'm all set. Go ahead. So he takes off. It's now like 5 or so. And the Cisco office is basically shut down. It's a ghost town. There's no one around. In the secure area that I'm in, it's just me. Yeah. And I'm on the phone with one of our advanced service guys. And I'm just getting ready to walk out, and I noticed that the rear camera, the Cisco camera in the room, was kind of facing down and to the side, which is like the off position. But I was in a call, so it should have been pointed at me. It should have been awake, and I just kind of caught that out of the corner of my eye, and I said, "Hey, the rear camera is like asleep. Is that okay?" And he goes, "Nope," and I was like, "So can I leave?" And he goes, "I don't know. But that's not okay. So you should call and check in with the room owner for IT for Cisco." So that guy's in North Carolina. So I call a guy named Rick in North Carolina. He'd actually be great to have on this podcast. He's at Amazon now. Anyway, I call Rick and I say, "Hey Rick, camera in the back of the room's not on. Is that okay?" And he goes, "Let me check the schedule." And he says, "No, there's a training in that room at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. There's a presenter. Like the rear camera has to work." And he says, we need to work on it. I had been with Room Ready for maybe 6 months, 7 months at that point in time. I was the sales guy. I had no technical ability. I didn't, So I'm like, "Okay, Rick, well, what does that mean? Like, I'm here. You're in North Carolina. What do we need?" He goes, "Well, we need your programmer." Okay. So I call in, and the programmer that had left New York is now on the West Coast in some other conference room. So this, we're at 5:30 or so now Eastern time. And I get a hold of Jeff, and Jeff's like, "Yeah, I can get working on this now. But I'm going to need to be remoted in." So Jeff gets hooked up with Rick, and Rick logs into the system in North Carolina through, Cisco's network. I'm in the room as like eyes and ears in the room. Yeah. And Jeff is writing code and pushing code and updating through Rick's connection in North Carolina. Okay, yeah. Long story short, we work on the room until 3:30 a.m. Before we finally like fixed whatever issue it was that was causing that rear camera to not participate in the call. Well, the funnier part about this is, of course, I had missed my train, and I was like, it's Manhattan. I'll just get a hotel room. Like as soon as we're done, I'll just like walk out the door and into any number of hundreds of hotel rooms. Actually, no, because that was the date for the Westminster Dog Show at the Madison Square Garden, and every hotel room was booked out. And it was like February or January. It was winter. It was super cold. And, hotels wouldn't let me just hang out in the lobby because they don't let loitering happen there, right? So I just walked from like lobby to lobby and got kicked out of lobbies until the trains started at 6 a.m. or whatever, so I could hop back up to Boston.
That is a funny story,
right? That's like my, you kind of joke around about like waiting for different places to open up or times, and it's like, that I lived that. That's right on.
That's funny. That's funny, but that essentially shows that when you're a small company, you wear multiple hats.
Yeah,
you're probably in the right place at the wrong time, or the other way around, but you make the most of it. And,
right on.
And at the end of the day, you want the customer to be happy.
Yeah, right. And you're open to learning, and I learned a whole heck of a lot about AV that I'm sure made me a way better salesperson because. It became more real than just a room full of black boxes. Like I started to understand what was talking to what, and asking questions as they were digging in, and it was a welcomed experience. So anyway, sorry, back to your story. AMX, late '90s, early 2000s. Selling into India, and then how did you kind of make that jump from that to the U.S.?
So 2000, there were some personal changes at the company I used to work for. I didn't feel comfortable with it, so I ended up quitting my job.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I'm like, I'm done working for other people. Let me just start my own consulting gig.
Yeah.
And I had old customers that I had made during my 4 years with the company. So I approached them and I said, hey, I need your support. I'm on my own. So they said, sure, we'll throw projects at you. Now, because I was on my own, I figured, let me just go to Infocom. So in 2000, Infocom was in Anaheim.
Yep.
And Gary Kay, I was in touch with Gary as his eyes and ears in India at the time, just small stuff. So I reached out to Gary. I said, hey, I'd like to come to the show. And at the time, they used to do all the setup for the show before the show began. So like 7 days prior to the show, everybody who was willing to give time to Infocom would give time, get there 7 days before the show, help out, set up everything.
Yeah.
So I asked Gary, I said, hey, I can be available if you need help. So he basically said, yeah, come on over. So he invited me 7 days before the show. Yep. And, that's how I went to Anaheim. And there was like a small group of people. At the time, they used to do the projection shootout.
Yeah.
So I was helping them set up, a bunch of projectors from different vendors in that setting. And that's how I got to know a few people because, there were a couple of people from some companies in Durham, North Carolina, California, some manufacturer people were there. NEC was there.
Yeah.
So 7 days helped out. The show began. Spent the 3 days at the show, and then I went back.
Yeah.
I thought that was it. So I was back to doing my so-called consulting thing. And then one fine day, I get an email from Martin. AV Associates was the company's name. He said, hey, I was talking to this rep from NEC. He had met you at Infocom, and he had some good things to say about your skill set. and it just so happens that we're looking for somebody with your skill set. And I'm like, okay. So Martin sends me some test packages for designs. I whip them up, send it back to him, and he's still not convinced. Because he thinks I might have had somebody else do it for me, right? So Martin's like, great, now I need to see it, let's have a video call.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, year 2000, video was not that, prominent. So he's like, yeah, let's do a video call. So in India, I had to rent a video conference facility, right? And if I were to convert to dollars, it was like $300 for an hour.
Yeah.
And that was out of my pocket.
Yeah.
And I was like, he wants to hire me, but why should I be doing this? But that was the deal. Martin's like, yeah, you got to pay for it. So I said, okay, well, let's do it. So I rented a picture tell facility at the time, which was, I think it was running Zytocron cards in a computer and doing video conferencing. So I had a video call and Martin was quizzing me left, right, and center. He's like, yeah, what if I did this? And what if the customer asked for this? So I was answering all his questions. And that's where he got the confidence saying, okay, he knows what he's doing.
Right on.
So at the end of the call, I'm like, so what's next? And he goes, well, I like everything that I've heard, but I want to see you in person. I'm like, okay, well, send me a ticket. And he goes, nah, you have to pay for your own ticket. So I'm like, wait a second. You want to hire me, but I have to pay for everything myself. And what is the guarantee that, I show up there and that you won't hire me?
Yeah.
And he was frank. He's like, yeah, that's a possibility. I'm like, okay, that is not encouraging in any way. But, at the time, the mindset was, here's an opportunity for me.
Right on.
I was on my own, doing my own little thing. And here I was presented with an opportunity and it had a 50% chance.
Yeah. And
so I said, you know what? I'll come. So again, back in September of 2000, I was here in June for Infocom, had gone back, and then I came back in September.
Yeah.
I interviewed with them, and right after the interview, they offered me a job.
Awesome.
But then because, they had to apply for a work visa for me, so they gave me a job offer.
Yep.
But they said you have to go back, wait for the work visa to get processed. Once that happens, you come over, which is what happened. So the processing took some time. So by March of 2001.
Oh, wow.
So it took like a good 5-6 months.
Yeah.
So March 2001, the visas came through. And that's when I came here.
So I'm super ignorant to it. Is that a quick processing? Is that normal? Is that long?
So H-1B was the category of visa, and it is a process. So at the time, it's a lottery system. So not everybody who applies gets it.
Yep.
And when the application is made, you have to prove that the person you are bringing over from some other country has a particular skill set that nobody else in the US has. So AV Associates at the time had to go through a rigorous interview process here, saying, we're hiring for this skill set, and we've interviewed 10, 15 people, and they don't meet the criteria. So they have to give all that documentation to the immigration service, saying, hey, look, we've done our due diligence. And that takes time, and that's what took like 4 to 5 months. Eventually it came through, and my first day was April 2nd, 2001 in Storrs, Connecticut.
That's incredible. And again, I'm like one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here is I think that's incredible. The risks for you, right? Like renting a video conferencing studio, or back in the early 2000s, like hopping on a plane, coming over, and then them like, okay, like they're I'm sure not hiring completely like thinking into the future. They probably have a need right then, right? They probably had a need in August, September talking to you, and now they're gonna like go through like you said, all the effort, the interviews, the paperwork,
Yeah.
to get you over here and the lottery. That's incredible. That's a whole lot of work, effort,
Yeah. I
risk.
mean, from my standpoint, it was like I was risking a lot. And the AV associates didn't have a whole lot to risk, but Martin was very kind. He assured me that they're doing the process, and it is a process. You just have to wait it out.
Yeah.
It's nothing that they control.
Yeah.
Once they submit all the documentation with the immigration service, you're basically just waiting in line for a response.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. I mean, for me, it was when that happened. When I came here, when they offered me a job, it immediately made me go back to that dinner discussion I had at my friend's house, where his dad said, "Hey, why don't you go meet this guy?"
Yeah.
And if I had not met the guy, I wouldn't have started with AV.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had an opportunity to learn AMX. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to work before Infocom, met people, and this whole thing would not have fallen in place.
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer that sometimes things happen for a reason, and you don't control it.
Yeah.
But it just falls. Everything falls in place.
Yeah. Why don't you go meet a guy? Say yes to that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I love it.
And that's when it all began. So 2001, AV Associates hired me. So my offer letter said AV Associates.
Yeah.
My first day, the company was sold while my visa was getting processed.
Yeah.
So AV Associates became MCSI.
Okay.
Which was a big national company at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So my first day at work was at MCSI.
Okay.
And it's funny, the phone lady would like, yeah, AV Associates, MCSI. And so, we started there. I spent like 3 weeks just going through orientation in Connecticut.
Yep.
And then they were opening a Boston office. So they basically said, why don't you go, start working in the Boston office.
Mm-hmm.
So I started here 2001 to 2003.
Okay.
And during that time, MCSI everybody in the industry knows what happened to MCSI. And it was a bad time for a lot of good people.
Mm-hmm.
MCSI just went under, mismanaged. I somehow saw the writing on the wall. And because of my situation being here on a work visa, I said, okay, if MCSI goes bankrupt, the work visa situation was such that if somebody else doesn't hire me in 6 months, I pack my bags and I go back. I'm not allowed to stay here legally.
And are you a single guy at this time? Are you married?
No, I was married.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I was married. So right before coming to the U.S., that's when I got married.
Okay.
And so my wife, she came over in June of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I saw 2003, the news was bad. Like we had won a project here in Boston for a college, and vendors would not sell us product because we were on credit hold with them. And that's when I started to realize that, okay, you have to jump ship.
Yeah.
Because at the time, I mean, for me, the situation was different. Like it wasn't like I would go collect unemployment or, go get another job. It wasn't that simple.
Yeah.
So that's when I started looking, and there was a small company in Newton, Massachusetts, GroupCom Systems.
Okay.
Amy Holt and Jeff Klein, they interviewed me. Again, a small, 15, 16 person mom and pop shop.
Yeah.
They were, again, in need of somebody with my skill set, so they hired me.
Yeah.
By the time, the other thing was between 2001 and 2003, I got my CTSD.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was very helpful with the transition also, because again, CTSD back in the day was in high demand. So GroupCom Systems, they hired me. They transferred my visa over. Everything was clean, and I started working there September of 2003. And that was fun. they brought the right people on board in terms of sales, project management. They started putting all the pieces together. 2003 to 2006 again was very similar period for me. What I had in between 98 and 2000, where I got to learn a lot.
Yeah.
And Amy basically gave the engineering department to me, saying, here, go run with it. It was a great company, good people. We grew from 16 to 40 people in 3 years.
Yeah.
4 million to 16 million in revenue, 3 years.
That's a fast time.
2006, another acquisition, Office Environments, which is now Red Thread. They wanted to expand by acquisition, so they bought GroupCom. I was hesitant. I'd gone through the painful experience of MCSI buying AV Associates and then running it into the ground.
Yeah.
So I had second thoughts. I'm like, if GroupCom is sold, I'm not going with them.
Yep.
But the truth of the matter is I didn't have an option. I still wasn't on a work visa. It wasn't like I could go and work somebody else. I was tied to GroupCom with that visa.
Yeah.
But I made my feelings known. I'm like, I'm very skeptical about this.
Yeah. So one fine day, Amy set up a meeting. John Mitten and Orlando Corsi both came. The big guys at our Office Environments. They sat down. They're trying to convince me. It's like, you should stay. Yeah.
We're a much different company. We're not MCSI. And I'm like, Sunil, you don't have an option.
You had to have a good poker face.
Exactly. So I'm like, okay, we'll stay. And so 2006.
So you'd been here for 5 years or so at that point in time?
3 years, 6, 5 years, 2001 to 2006. Yeah.
And again, super ignorant. So I apologize if I'm asking anything awkward, but had you started to try and become a citizen at that point? Were you just kind of like, can you apply? Like how I don't understand how that works with work visas. And so curious there.
So the process with H-1B is you get your H-1B visa, and it has a validity of, I think at the time it was 3 years, after which you could renew it for another term of 3 years. And that's it. You just had 2 terms of your work visa, after which you could not apply for a third time.
Okay. But
during those 6 years, you could start the process to become a citizen.
Yep.
And Amy, I started that process when I was at MCSI, but I had reached a stage where I was like this close to getting the citizenship, and that's when I changed jobs.
Yeah.
The immigration rules at the time said, well, if that happens, you go back and stand in line again.
So with them acquiring, did that start you over again? No. Okay.
No, the visa gets rolled over with an acquisition.
But that's kind of like why you say you're stuck, because you didn't want to then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was, like I said, I was like one step away from getting my citizenship in 2003 when I decided to switch jobs.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I had to go back and reapply and start the process all over again. Now, keep in mind, at that time, 9/11 had already happened. So, there was this big backlog with immigration. And, again, the whole system was just jammed.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like you could get back in line and then, come up where you were pretty quickly. So I remember in 2006, 2003, when I switched to GroupCom, they applied and I received my citizenship in 2008. It was, again, a good 5-year process.
Yeah. That's wild. Sorry, I'm curious about the intricacies or complexities of that. Like that's a whole a foreign world to me. So that's in pins and needles.
A lot of variables because my wife couldn't work at the time. because she's here as a legal dependent. And, at the time, the law stated that, a dependent spouse cannot work.
Wow.
So it's just me. We already had my eldest in 2002 and my youngest in 2005. So we had 2 kids by 2006.
Wow.
But I think John Mitten and Orlando, both of them came through in terms of their commitment.
Yeah.
It was so I continued at Red Thread. They entrusted me with running the engineering department. We grew. We made another acquisition in Connecticut at the time, BKM Systems, and life was good. You had a seat at the table. The company was great to work for. By the way, it was Red Thread is owned by Steelcase.
Yeah.
And I should mention, Mintz Levin were the guys who did the immigration process for me.
So Sunil is hitting on a pain point because I actually sold an opportunity to Mintz Levin where we did a big IT refresh for them. So their IT program hired us, and we ran with a multi-city project. They did 5 cities, 25 total rooms, and it was a pretty big project because a lot of the rooms were like town hall type meeting rooms, some divisible spaces. So it was close to $1 million project, and it had gone flawlessly. Like, it was an amazing project. We had a lot of fun with it. Mintz really loved the work that we did for them. And I had a great relationship with their IT team. And so they were getting ready to do a Boston, refresh of their space. But it was a facility. So, they were completely renovating. That's the word I was looking for, renovating space. And I was super arrogant. I was like, yeah, I mean, they'll get bids, but we just knocked it out of the park. Like, we have support contracts on $1 million worth of stuff spread out across 5 cities. Really great integration between our team and their IT team. And I knew I was competing with Red Thread. I knew I was competing with there was a couple other firms that were going after it. I'm sure DGI was involved. I wouldn't be surprised if AdTech or HB was involved, but I was like, yeah, I got this, no problem. And then I lost to Red Thread. And when I was talking to their IT team about it, they were like, "Yeah, actually, it turns out Red Thread is a client of Mintz Levin. They have Mintz Levin on retainer, and one of the partners went to bat for him and said, "Hey, that's great. Room Ready is a good company, but I mean, if it's all the same, I'd really prefer to go with Red Thread because they're a client." And I'd always been like, dang it. And then when I met Sunil, he was like, yeah, and Red Thread went to bat for me as a company. They retained Mintz Levin on my behalf. And I was like, you jerk. You're the reason I lost. It's your fault. You cost me $1 million. It was actually like 1.8, I think, or something ridiculous like that.
It was a big project. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
life was good.
Just poke the bear, Sunil. Scratch the wound, rip off the scab.
I had to do it. So 2013 rolled around, and I'm talking to John Mitten. I'm like, John, what's next for me? And John's like, well, aren't you happy? I'm like, I'm happy, but what is next? And John's like, you take my place when I retire. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's not happening anytime soon. So we talked. We still have great relationship. So we put a transition plan in place. I'm like, I need to get out of here. I love the place, but I can't be spending my life here. So in 2015,
you got that entrepreneurial spirit. I'm hearing that from back in India. I wanted to, quit. Yep. Wanted to start fresh. What's next for me at Red Thread? How do I get to the top? I want to start something new.
And my wife kept pushing me. I'll give her all the credit. She kept nudging all along, saying, you're not getting any younger. We have 2 kids now. And by the time because I was a citizen, she started, doing a job at a bank. So there was some income coming in, and she was like, "Do what you want to do. This is your time. I mean, you won't be able to do it when you're 50." But I was still scared and skeptical. I'm like,
Yeah, of
it's
course.
not that easy with two kids growing up. So I kept delaying it. But yeah, 2015, I told John, because my crew was on cruise control.
Yeah.
I had great guys that we worked with. Everybody did their part, and I felt like I was not adding any value
Yeah.
to the system. So that's when John and I talked, and John, he wasn't happy, but he understood. So I moved on. And it had
So I'm going to stop you there because you're a modest guy. You're a humble guy, but man, what a hallmark of great leadership. Like, I love that you could just cruise past that. I'm a leader in our organization that's on autopilot. I'm bored because I've developed and delegated and and again, you're a leading integrator in the area. Like Red Thread is it's not a small company. Like it's not like you don't have growing revenue and more clients coming in. And, so you just kind of glossed over that, but I don't think I wanted to let you. That's incredible, Sunil. Like, to say that I'm on autopilot and there's nothing for me to do is like one of the hallmarks of really fantastic leadership. So kudos to you to get to a place where you were replaceable. I mean, that's what every leader needs to aspire to, right? So great job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, I keep mentioning John Madden, but he was very instrumental in again, AV Design Labs being where it is right now.
Yeah.
Because when I said I want to quit, the first question he asked is, "Where are you going?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't want to go work for a competitor because again, I was completely happy at Red Thread, and just going over to the other side wouldn't make any difference to me. So I said, well, just to make you happy, John, I'm not going to a competitor.
Yeah.
But what exactly are you doing, Sunil? I'm like, I have no idea.
So I love, like, in business, right? We don't hear enough really great stories of healthy, kind, good relationships. I actually don't know John at all. I've never met him. But I love hearing that you had a relationship with him, and he, at kind of the head of the company, had developed a relationship with you in which he gave you freedom to say, I quit, and, but not right now. Like, let's develop a plan where I'm successful, Red Thread is successful. There are so many toxic, terrible relationship leadership structures out there, at the top of companies where, like, you would have been walked out the door, right? Like, if you would have said,
Yeah, I mean, nothing had stopped me from just, washing my hands, 2-month notice, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But that's not what we had developed in, the 12 years that we were together.
Yeah.
And you're right, I have tremendous respect for the leadership at Red Thread and Steelcase in general. But so John's like, well, take your time, Sunil. Just float around for a few months here. If you don't feel like doing any work, that's okay. I owe you that much for the 12 years you've given me.
Wow.
But in that time, figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay. So I just floated for, a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was doing, like, okay, if it's not integration, then maybe I should be doing consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I said. Okay, let's do consulting work.
Yeah.
So I was literally planning on doing that when another opportunity came along, which was, the outsource opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Because back in 2008, I was tasked by John Middens. We all integrators have this problem.
Yeah.
We were no different at Red Thread because of the cyclical nature of the integration business.
Yeah.
We found ourselves in a very difficult situation every summer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come summertime, we would get slammed with projects. And the way we had set up our process, we could not kickstart a project until the drawings for those projects were finalized. And what would happen was, every June, we would have this massive backlog.
Yeah.
And we just had 2 draft people on staff at the time.
Yeah.
And they could only do so much. All our engineers also did drafting.
Yeah.
So we would still be backed up. And, because of that, we were leaving money on the table because we couldn't fulfill projects in time.
Yep.
So that's when John came to me and said, we need to solve this problem. So we looked at the process and we said, you know what? Maybe we should find a partner who does drafting for us on an as-needed basis.
Yeah.
And, when we get backlogged, we bring them on, they help us out so that we are no longer backlogged.
Yeah.
And that way, we don't have to invest in a full-time resource, which we really wouldn't have anything for them to do come September, because then the work would have dried out.
Yep.
So he said, that's a great idea. Let's start looking. So we experimented with 2 companies here in the Boston area, and it wasn't working out. And then through my connections, I had a connection in India.
Yeah.
And I said, well, how about we get this thing done in India?
Yeah.
And so we approached them. They had no idea about AV.
Yeah.
I went there for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I hired the guys.
Yep.
I taught them AV, and I taught them our process. This is what we want.
Yeah.
And after 3 weeks, I come back, we start the process, and it was not going good.
Yeah.
This is in 2008. Again, the IT infrastructure and systems weren't the greatest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were like sending big files by email, and I would hit send, assuming that those guys received all the documentation.
Right.
I would go to bed, and these guys would not have received the documentation because the file was too big. The next morning, I would wake up and I'm like, what are my drawings? And it's like, well, we didn't get the file.
Yeah.
So we had all those growing pains associated with it.
Yep.
But then John's direction was focus on the process.
Yeah.
Like if something is not working, it has to do with the process. And then you change the process to make it work. So that's when we transitioned to an FTP site and, transferring files through FTP instead of sending by emails.
Yeah.
So we evolved, so the first 6 months were tough.
Yeah.
And almost to a point where I went back and I'm like, this is not going to work out. But then I was redirected back saying, focus on the process.
So I don't know John at all, but I'm going to definitely want to meet him someday because he sounds just like a fantastic guy, a great leader. And not that I want to promote my competitor, but at the same time, sounds like a fantastic guy. That's great. I love it.
And his background prior to coming to AV was IT.
Yep.
So he was part of Expedex and, implementing, IT, ERP systems, that kind of thing. So he was he knew that things had to be process oriented.
Yeah.
So we kept working at it. We fixed the process. And since 2008, Red Thread did not have, and the draft people that we had on staff, we promoted them to be engineers.
Yeah.
And then what we did was we took all the drafting away from all the engineers and gave it to this company saying, you are responsible for doing drafting.
Yep.
So it opened up a lot of opportunities for us. First of all, we weren't bogging down our engineers doing just drafting work because from a billable perspective, your engineering work can be sold at a higher dollar than drafting.
Yeah.
So we were spending all this time with our engineers doing drafting, which we took, give it away, and then started doing more engineering related tasks. So 2008, we basically went without draft people on staff.
Yeah.
So when it came time to quit the job, this is something that came to mind saying, maybe this is a common problem with all integration companies.
Right on.
And there is an opportunity here.
Yeah.
So that's when, AV Design Lab was formed. And funny enough, 2000, when I had left my company in India to start my consulting gig,
Yeah.
the company I had formed was AV Design Labs.
That's
So I
fun.
stuck to the same name.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
great. Full circle. So I'm super curious about this. So you go over to India, spend 3 weeks, teach another company essentially what to do, how to sell to your company, build them up. When you launch out on your own, is it through the same people, or did you just start from scratch again and reteach new people?
I basically started from scratch because I knew how to build it.
Yeah.
So I did hire 2 people that I knew about.
Yep.
That these guys knew AV.
Yep.
And they knew the workflow. So we started with just 2 guys.
Yeah.
2017, we started AV Design Labs with just these 2 guys.
And Red Thread as a client.
And Red Thread did not come as a client day one.
Yeah.
No.
Because you'd already got it set up, and they didn't necessarily need to come with you. Yeah.
And rightly so, right? Because any company is first going to take care of their needs first. I mean, they don't want to risk because they did not have any draft people on staff.
Yeah.
They couldn't just transition over to me with full confidence with just 2 guys being able to do all the work for them.
Right on. Yeah.
So, and I did not approach John on day one because I knew that I still had to get my infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
Get few people trained. Only then I could go out and sell the service. So no, I mean, day one, it was just me doing, hard gigs here. And then DJI was our first customer. Actually, no. So local rep here, Narayan from Sapphire, he introduced me to this company, Cabot Solutions in Andover.
Okay.
They were my first customer. They were also a small company. They needed help with some drawings, and that's the first customer I signed on.
That's fun. That's awesome.
We got started, and the 2 people then became 4, became 6, and now we're 40.
Hey. Just like that. Start a company.
Like
2, 6, 40. It's easy peasy, everybody. If you're listening and you're wondering if you should be an entrepreneur, Sunil is telling it straight, just like it is.
All right, now comes the fine print.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
When you start a business or a company, there are going to be growing pains.
Yeah.
And mine was no different. Cash flow issues, especially having, so-called employees on the other side of the continent.
Yeah.
How do you remote manage them?
So here's a quick, just curious question. Did you hire, train, and get people ready in India before you took a contract, or did you go out and sell it first because you knew you could do it if you had to, and then after you got a contract, you hired folks in India?
I did the former. I hired people first.
Yeah, you believed. You believed.
I was confident that the work will come.
Yeah.
I just needed to have the infrastructure ready to go when the work started flowing, so that I didn't have to go back to the customer and say, "Oh, give me another 2 months so that I can do my hiring, training."
Yeah.
I was ready to go. So I did invest in people before I actually had customers.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
That's courageous, so to speak. That I love it. Believing in yourself, believing in the vision, what you were going to do, investing in it, your own dollars, and making it. Yeah. It's not like you had a whole heck of a lot of those laying around. I bet starting off from scratch, family.
Oh, no. Yeah,
that's incredible. Well done, man.
So it was fun. I mean, and one thing I learned from my boss, John Mitten, was you hire the best people.
Yeah.
And you let them be.
Yeah.
You trust them. You give them all the opportunities and responsibilities, and you let them operate on their own. Mm-hmm. You do not micromanage.
Yeah.
And because, natural tendency for people, especially me, is like, what are these guys doing in India?
Right on.
Are they spending time
Yeah.
working on stuff, or are they doing something else? Like, there was no oversight from here.
Yep.
But that was because I was trained in my previous job that that's not what you do.
Right on. Yeah.
So these two guys are still with me,
Yeah.
and they have full autonomy, full control.
Yeah.
Each one of them manage 20 people.
Yep.
And I don't get involved at all.
Yeah.
Like, they have full autonomy on anything that they need to do from a personnel standpoint,
Yeah.
training standpoint, whatever they need. I just say, okay, if it works for you, it works for me.
That's I'm wrapping my head around this, right? I mean, I'm an executive within Room Ready. We have 100 employees that are spread out, across 12 states in the U.S. So in some ways, like I get it, but in other ways, it's crazy town, man. You have 40 employees on a different continent. You are representing and you're over here, but you're the only employee in the U.S. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So it's that on steroids. Like I think about the comment you made about Red Thread. Like, I was bored. I was kind of looking for things to do. Obviously, I don't think you're bored anymore. But at the same time, like that model of delegating, of empowering, of trusting the people around you, not micromanaging, really kind of laid the foundation or the groundwork for you to be able to start this, and then trust in those, a couple lieutenants, so to speak, that you have that have been with you from the beginning, and that's incredible. Like it's crazy to think you have a whole company on a different continent, and but it's working well. That's awesome.
Yeah. So our average employee age is 25.
Yeah.
And one thing I have learned in the last few years is the mindset of the new generation that's entering the workforce is completely different than people like you and me.
How so?
So your approach to managing them has to be totally different.
Yeah.
You have to flip the management book upside down and look for ways and means where, like you said, empower them, not micromanage them, just let them be, and they'll do the work.
Yeah.
And we have a flat organization.
Yeah. We
don't have hierarchies back in India. So both locations, so we have two offices.
Yep.
Each, Nipranch and Vikas, the two guys, they independently run each location.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's it. We don't have any other designation in the company. So they're team leaders.
So here, real quick, sorry to interrupt. These guys are in two separate locations in India.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did they start off in two separate locations in India? No.
Okay. So both of them started in the same location.
Yep.
As we grew. I think once we had reached like 12 employees, we started experiencing this issue about, like getting talent.
Yeah.
From that one location.
Yep.
So we strategically opened an office in the second location, which happens to be a college town.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of young engineers.
Yep.
So we only hire mechanical engineers and architects.
Mm-hmm.
We don't hire anybody else.
Yep.
The second location was more strategic, and one of the two guys, Vikas, wanted to move. So we said, okay, you want to move? We want to start an office in this place. Let's get started.
That's great. Have you ever read the book Shoe Dog?
I have not. I'm not a big reader.
So I am now, have been recently. I go through waves. That one I audiobooked, and I've actually audiobooked it twice and read it once. It's the story of Phil Knight starting Nike and how he got started. And it's super funny because some people say that the visionary leaders sometimes are liars, right? Like They tell things that aren't true. And in this case, like you read the book Shoe Dog and you're like, he was bold-faced lying here and there about capabilities or where they had people and then I heard somebody describing Elon Musk and how, he talks about like entrepreneurial endeavors and, what's happening with Tesla or SpaceX or any number of, and they were like, no, he's not lying. He's just telling future truths.
Yeah.
And that it super made me laugh. But I was curious to hear like if you had to if you had to do anything to get one of them to move to the new location, but it sounds like no. It sounds like he was excited about it. And
I was lucky enough where Vikas did want to move, and I let him pick the city.
Oh, cool.
I didn't force him. I didn't force him to the college town.
Yeah.
So even though that's where I wanted, and the second office is in a city where I was born, so I had familiarity with the city. But I at the time I gave him again all the options. It's like you pick the location.
Yep.
Just keep in mind that one of the reasons we're trying to open a second location is so that we can have access to good talent. So it didn't matter whether we stayed in Pune, but you could go anywhere as long as, because I also made it very clear that this second location is going to be your baby. You are going to be responsible. So 6 months out, don't come to me and say, well, I'm not able to hire good people here. Because that's what we're doing this for.
Yeah.
So, and he wanted to move to the same city. So it just turned out that, again, things fell in place.
Yeah.
And Pune, again, we started with just like 2 people.
Yeah. That's great. So from 0 to 40 people in the last 3 years, from 0 to how many clients are you supporting with your 40 people? 20
clients. Yeah.
20 clients, AV integrators. Is that pretty much through in the Northeast? Is that kind of scattered around the U.S.? How have you?
They are scattered around the U.S., predominantly Northeast, again, because of my contacts, connections, familiarity with the area. But we do have customers out on the West Coast, Midwest, Florida, South, so Atlanta. So we do have customers all over.
Yeah. I'm curious, what's your favorite part? Like what makes your heart beat the fastest? Like, is it acquiring new clients, selling? Is it, managing? Is it kind of the strategy of how it all, like what's, I mean, I'm sure that you like various aspects of all of it, but what is it? What makes your heart beat fast?
So it might sound very cliche, but honestly, what really gets me going is problem solving customers' issues. Like when I'll give you a classic example. When DGI came on board as a customer, they hired us for engineering services. Mm-hmm. And once we onboarded them, once we understood their process, that's when I realized that, what they really need is drafting services. Mm-hmm. Because again, their engineers were doing the drafting. And then they kept saying that they don't have enough time to focus on other engineering stuff.
Yeah.
I went back to Mike and Dave and I said, it's great. I mean, I'm not complaining, I'm loving the engineering thing, but would you rather consider taking drafting off from, your 2 engineers? Those guys, thought and understood where I was coming from. So they agreed. We started DGI at 15 hours a week in 2017. And we do about 210 hours a week with them now.
So again, like you're a super humble guy, and I know some details that allow me to kind of poke at you here, but you charge a little bit more for engineering services than you do drafting services, right?
That's right.
So you demoted yourself. You said, I see a better workflow for your company, but I'm going to take a demotion. That's incredible.
I mean, most recently, I did the same thing with another customer on the West Coast, Lightworks. I approached David and I said, look, now that we worked for a year, this is where I think we would bring most value for you. Yeah. And that meant demoting myself. But like I said, one thing I've learned, being in business, working for someone is the money will come.
Yeah.
If as long as you do the right thing for the customer,
Yeah.
You have to do the right thing at the
Yep.
end of the day.
Yep.
And once that is done, you earn their trust, and that's it. I mean, they will entrust you with other things.
Right on.
And what again, as a company, we've evolved. We started with drafting, we added the engineering piece, we added programming. We're now doing 3D rendering visualization services.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're about to start a new company called ICT Design Labs.
Mm-hmm.
So again, focusing the same thing that we do for the AV world, we're going to do for the IT and security world.
That's awesome.
And our model has been a subscription-based service. So if I have 10 services to offer, my customers have access to all 10 services.
Yeah.
Like I don't pigeonhole them into using just one service.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, it turns out to be a win-win proposition.
Yeah. I want to kind of double click back. You really do take a long view approach, right? You're not out for just the short-term wins. You're really looking for, the right thing is always the right thing, and the right thing always pans out long-term, right?
Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah.
But it does pan out.
Yeah. And like a 15-hour commitment at the wrong thing, when recorrected, turned into 100 or 210-hour commitment. A year, 2 years later. That's a fantastic story. And I can absolutely see how you get started in the Northeast, because you're a relational guy. You build trust well. And there's a lot of people out here in the Northeast, I'm sure, that trust you. But at the same time, I'm excited to see how the future goes for you, because you're offering a service that doesn't have any geographical barriers, right? And you have an ability to grow the infrastructure to take it on. So you're living the American dream in a lot of ways, right? Immigrating from India, starting your own company, providing employment opportunities for dozens of people. It's an incredible story. Thanks a ton for sharing it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. It was definitely a pleasure sharing it.
Yeah. I we're just getting started with the podcast. I can't wait to revisit, 6 months, a year, down the road, see where things are going at. It'll be a lot of fun, but I do want to, pay attention a little bit to time. I think I've already taken more than I asked for. So thank you so much. And Sunil, it was a true pleasure. Cheers.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thanks, Philip. Take care.
You too.